All right. Welcome. We are very excited to have Gail Dendy here with us. She's a very accomplished poet with 8 collections of poetry published, which is amazing. And yeah, we cannot wait to hear all the beautiful poems. I'm not going to read her bio out because I'm sure everyone here knows why they are here. We're here for the poetry, so let's get right to it. Um, is there anything you want to say about yourself, Gail, before we start screen sharing and all of that?
No, I'm fine. I'm just going to jump right in, and I'm going to be reading off basically a script. So I'm going to be flipping between screens. I don't have 2 screens. But okay, so thank you, everybody. Um, where's my thing on? Yeah. So thanks, people who've joined. And thank you to the Red Wheelbarrow for inviting me to share my work. I've always felt that poetry that isn't shared somehow exists in a twilight state. Um, and so most of the poems that I'm going to read tonight are new or new-ish. Quite a few of them have been published on the AVBOB site. In fact, some of them even for the AVBOB 2024-25 site. So yeah, I'm just sort of trying them out on you, and I hope you'll enjoy them. Generally, when I put a program together, I take a begin at the beginning approach. But tonight, I actually want to reverse that. So instead of starting with poems about birth, I'm going to jump into the far side of the spectrum and read some poems about age. And the first poem I'm going to read takes as its kickoff point that well-known poem by Jenny Joseph called Warning, and which many people erroneously think is entitled When I Am Old. Like Jenny Joseph's poetic narrator, mine is also considerably older than myself. So her poem begins, when I'm an old woman, I shall wear purple, with a red hat which doesn't go and doesn't suit me. Now, my poem is called Purple. She said, when she was old, she would wear purple. I am naturally part purple, the purple tram lines running along my wrists and, most particularly, across the back of the hand, knuckle to knuckle joined, it seems, by swollen purple veins, trellis of rose stems. And there are purple rivers in my arms and my feet. And when I bump into things, my skin sports spreading purple badges, burst skein beneath the skin. And when I've run out of purple, I'll turn to the old woman rattling her stick on the railings and ask, have you ever shed your purples, your amaranth, murray, plummy skins? And if so, how did you do it? And who did you do it for? And why? I don't normally write poems to order. And certainly the next poem I'm going to read wasn't ordered by anybody. However, I did write it for a really good friend of mine called Tony, and it was for his 70th birthday. That is obviously the biblical 70. Now, he's a multi-talented man. He's an architect by profession. He's also a pianist, and he's crazy about Mozart. He's a ballet dancer. He's a comedian. He's a cat lover and a drag artist. And just to fill you in, when we get to section 3 of the poem, the titles that I'm referring to are contemporary dance works by Martha Graham, such as Appalachian Spring. While when I mention the Bluebird, it actually means the Bluebird Variation, which is from the ballet The Sleeping Beauty. So this poem is called 70, Theme and Variations. You have been biblically approved. Not quite Noah, but who'd want to be as old as that? They say age comes with a price. They say memory's the silver lining on the cloud. They say that as we age, the world looks different, so that all that now looks wrong, in fact, looks right, and hence it's worth its weight in gold. Age, a number, a note on a sliding scale, a continuum that transforms the past into the present tense. Just think, you could have met Mozart on the way to Vienna, Paris, London, drunk champagne and played a game of cards, given advice on a sonata, or how to improve his latest opera. Age doesn't slow, it dances on. You could have starred in Graham's Horizons, Appalachian Spring, or Jacob's Dream, and, for good measure, provided instructions to Nijinsky about what fawns rarely do on all those dull afternoons when shadows strike the forest floor and the chipmunks on. Or Bluebird You, avoiding the prowling cat that sulks behind unblinking eyes and eyes the cream and chicken fat. Age, the calculation of true dimensions, the arching measure of a sky part pillow white, part Dresden blue, a sloped, pitched roof, a porthole window, a set of sturdy struts and well-hewn beams standing not outside of you, but in your heart that's meadow broad and sound, while beyond the ground a river's strafed with ripples and of necessity parades the course of its only source, rushing forward to embrace you, then moves on. Feathers, laughter, sequins. Who else could delight with the comic's tricks? The curtain opens, and the ground is moored in spotlight, and there you stand, beloved by all, husband, father, grandfather too, uniquely, utterly, incomparably you. Not quite Noah, but who'd want to be as old as that? Congratulations, Tony, you have been biblically approved. So, returning to the theme of purple, my next poem is entitled Ruminations on the Plum, and I make no apologies for its sensuality. You'll note the allusion here to nursery rhyme, and interestingly, I found that as a writer, I return over and over to either nursery rhyme rhythms or to mythology, or, as you'll see later, very much to biblical images. And sorry, I've just lost my place. Right, ruminations on the plum. The pip lying in the heart of the plum, as though fastened with hooks and eyes, as though sewn into its purple jacket, having dressed for dinner. You'd think it inviolable, but the sheets show the blood of the plum, or something like. Allow me, you say, and prise away the flesh from the pith. You have such kind hands for this brutal work. In the heart of me lies the purple plum, in my heart of hearts, fee, fi, fo, fum, a giant walks with his clumsy boots, tearing my hair, digging my roots. When the plum bursts from over-ripening, the pulp smells more sweet than bitter. We must open the windows momentarily to let the fresh air in. In the fresh air, two birds balance themselves as though treading water. We have dressed for dinner this evening, you in your suit, and me with my plum-coloured dress so loose it takes on the shape of a river. I wind myself around the island of you. I swear a plum lies in the heart of me, deep and moist in the root of me. It is the lie in the heart of me. My heart is not like a plum at all. This is a lie. Although, admittedly, it's red and moist and is carried by 4 little branches. It constantly ticks to remind of the end of the world. My heart is far too much like a plum, fastened with hooks and eyes and sewn snugly into its purple jacket. But one kind word, a gesture, a glance, and it promptly undresses. Conclusion: my heart is a bloody nymphomaniac. I just want to have some water, if you'll just bear with me. So, as I always remind people, my poetry is at least 90% fiction. So when I write of babies or children, they are fictitious. In fact, I'm more than happy to label myself a childless cat lady. And this next poem is both about breath and childbirth, and it's called Breathe. When I became we. The nurses kept telling me to keep on breathing. Breathe, breathe, they said, as they lifted you up like an offering. Or were they speaking to you? Forgive me this dark confusion, but at the time I imagined us as two inverse words locked together in a line of poetry. And the poem said, breathe, breathe, and was startled more by your presence on the ward than by my own. The nurses wrapped you in a tiny square of blankets so I could take you home. And that day, truth lay snug beside me, serene as the world's first breath, or Lazarus shining in my mouth, his words new and fresh upon my tongue. Well, just as giving birth is a way of sending a being out into the world, so it's the same thing with poetry. Poets create poems and we send them out into the world too. But of course, we're taking far more of a chance when sending out a poem in terms of the reaction that we're likely to get. And my next poem is called Taking a Chance. It seemed I had no further use for language, or perhaps I convinced myself it was so. My life was too much in flux, everything diffracted by the thinning shallows of the sea. A landscape of salt water, the sting of the wound, the careless articulation. Not language, but what I see. I see a crenellation of shining glass. Flakes of sun float like peaceable water. I wish to own such lucency, to touch the words which I send out into the world, to take their chance among holy men and thieves. Well, as we all know, if you send your poetry out into the world, somewhere along the line, there's going to be a poetry critic. As Mel Brooks put it, with the birth of the artist came the inevitable afterbirth, the critic. And my next poem has probably been about, 40 years in the making. And it's very loosely based on an incident where I was literally conned into writing a poetry review. And all I can say about that is the moral of the story is that if you're going through extreme personal trauma or any sort of disability or mental health problems, do not write a review. So this poem is called A Review. I had been asked to review a book of poetry. The requester had not known of the trauma I was enduring at that particular time. 2 open graves. Later, a bridging headstone. Later, dog tracks in the snow. A simple vignette. We call it history, a time of balance, life and death. Also, a shattering. Also, a strange complacency. Therefore, a time of imbalance. A line drawn through a heart. A line shaken loose from a poem. This is not my type of poetry, I argued. What I meant is, my wounds could not be healed. What I meant was, the book's theme was grievous to me, like a sapling sawn to a stump. What I meant was that the whole was neither the sum of its parts nor a disconnection of one part from another. What I meant was the distortion which occurs in winter sunlight, the plight of an icicle trapped in a tree. And now for something completely different. Here's a whole series of love poems, and each poem is anchored in nature, and as you'll see, each has an entirely different rhythm, cadence, tone, and general approach. And in fact, throughout my writing career, I've tried as much as possible not to repeat the way I write, but to keep pushing forms and structures into different directions. The first love poem I'm going to read is fairly conventional. Where You Are. Thunder measures out the distance between lightning flash and you and me. We are still together, though separately, 2 birds on updrafts treading air. It wouldn't be fair to ask, where are you now? For you are here and everywhere, where I can lie and hear the roll of thunder, watch lightning tilting at the dark, understand Whatever tethers you to me is the secret within the art. And the next poem plays around and to some extent reinvents Greek mythology. So I've called it Interventions, which is also, in a case, Inventions, Proserpine and Eurydice. He'll find you in the netherworld where nothing grows or opens up. Here, opaled pastures begat rock, rock begat stalactites spinning a yarn or two. Here, there's no wool to demarcate a path inwards or outwards. There is no strange-eyed beast with fire at its breast, with a heart solid as a chimney, with leather valves to pump out breath. You're in the nether zone, and he'll be coming for you, one footfall at a time, raising the stakes with his strings and songs. My dear, tone deaf is not an option. You'll slide past him without the courtesy of a single glance. And would I ever take it back? The wedding feast, the gaiety, my darling little snake? And the third love poem takes as its basis a weather report, but here, of course, it intertwines an external or actual weather report with an internal or an emotional weather report. It's called Forecast. Dry and hot, the wind northeasterly, UV index extreme. Darling, where are you now? There is a desert here that surrounds my house. Possible drizzle in the afternoon. Nighttime, skies will begin to clear. I remember how you touched me, the savage jolt of static, its truth, its cruelty. Cloudy at first, then brightening. Visibility fair, wind moderate westerly. Alone, I couldn't hear the depth of my soul's music. We had to dream it together, like silver fish surfacing. Storm warning, possible hail, move cars under cover, seek shelter. My wet feet and open arms, and the day's mirage sliding away like turmoil. Oh, my dearest love. Cloudy at first, then clearing. Wind 3 kilometers an hour. Some fog patches overnight. Perfect visibility tomorrow. Again, excuse me, I'm just going to take a break. Right, back to. So, with love stories and love poems, we know that love stories don't always have happy endings. And the next poem is about what happens after a long-term marriage has ended. Reclamation. I never thought with loving I'd have to start again. It was a slow start, with many false starts along the way. Did I say false? Oh, reader, I would have trusted him always with my life. He was my touchstone, my lodestone, and the weight was something I carried joyously in the pliant angle of my joints and the sweat between my breasts. I waxed and waned at the slightest touch, all for his sake, dear reader, since I had forsaken myself, a dereliction of duty equaled by his dereliction of desire. And there was no turning back, no door clamped in a wall. Oh, sweet, oh, lovely wall. And I see nothing either through it or above it, though my soul longs to rise as though accordant with a shaft of oxygen, reclaiming life. And finally, I decided to drop in a humorous love poem, which is called This Is Not a Love Poem. It was your voice that I liked best, and sometimes your lips. Those were furniture which once I snuggled up against. More fool me. And through the burrow to which language fled, the words I mean, not meant for me, came riding, kite-blasted through air's transparency, transfixed away from history. Our history, I mean, the one that hasn't happened as it should. We all say that, we fools that are meant to be. And as I catch the upstream chill of autumn's lease, and look for meaning where none was meant to be, more fool me for hanging on your lips, when what I liked about you, I liked best. Your voice, I mean. And loving that, I forget that I forgot about the rest. And now we enter the world of what I would call alternate realities. My most recent book of poems, which was called On Days Such as This, contained an entire section of work that was allegorical and symbolic. Now, the next few poems were in fact written after that collection was published, but they continue my allegoric symbolic investigations and also questionings. And I think this will probably be the direction in which my next book will be written. As I say, I like to try and make each book and each work that I do sort of slightly different and have a very different feel to it. Anyway, here we go, a qualified truth. It was the truth of the matter, although the matter had yet to be decided upon, and the decision could not have been taken lightly, except there was no one qualified to make the decision. I say, not qualified, but, said the man on the bus in the seat next to mine, who would be qualified? The bus tilted to the left as we rounded the corner, and all the passengers tilted with it like rows of dolls. Their time for play was over. There were commitments to be had in this story of a bus going nowhere except round a particular corner. The man stood up and pressed the bell. No doubt he wished to alight, to stop either the story or its meaning, or both the story and the bus. And this was the essence of the matter. I had grown to know the man who sat in the seat beside me. Of one flesh, as they say in bad novels, meaning something which one would rather not explain. For it seemed the matter had already been decided, and so I, too, alighted from the bus, which departed as though entering blue water or else a white winter. And the truth was further away now, though in terms of this particular story, amply qualified. Now, sometimes it literally just takes a single word for my mind to change gear, as it were, and start embroidering a poem. And the word that gives rise to the next piece was the simple word after. And what I'm going to read here is really only a fragment. After a fragment. After the summer has ended, when the healing begins, after grief, after the tide has pooled, after love, between shallows, after the rain is absorbed into blackening earth, after the dark, after the summer, after the rains, after the flood, after we survived. Well, I'd say all this sounds somewhat apocalyptic, so that leads me to my next poem, When the Last Bell Sounded. When the last bell sounded, we stood at attention, believing this would be the last sound on earth. The day was shapeless and plain, like a woman past her prime. Were we not kindred spirits? Did her here and our now possess an intimacy? As I say, the last bell struck and we found ourselves standing beneath a gift of dark sky. The stars were further away than they'd ever been. Not bells, but keening until the morning lit up like a prayer, and the day was blessed. I don't often write poems alluding to war, but I did write this next poem several years ago. As always, I personally prefer not to anchor my work in actual political events, but to infuse an indeterminate, almost dreamlike quality into it. There's something eschatological about this poem, but I like to think there's also something hopeful. Over the threshold. When the war began, The oaks were devoid of foliage, the way we were devoid of adequate metaphors for expressing it. My cousin was fighting, not as soldier, but as civilian, sufficiently caring or patriotic to want to barter his life for a triumph he might never witness. Nevertheless, he was dutiful, which is perhaps a simile for love, for do we not give our all for our beloveds? And when the church bell sounded for the very last time, I noticed it was cracked and the sound was thin and ragged. And when my cousin stepped over the threshold, and the oaks were in full leaf, and the bell restored, and the conflict a thing of the past, I held out my hand to my blood relative, calling him brother, as if from the time of his absence my life opened inwards onto a terraced slope, where farmers were seeding their crops, and a line of sycamores bent their swaying backs away and away from the stony ground. Well, from endings to beginnings. I prefaced this reading by saying I was going to work backwards from old age to youth. So here's a poem about how children see and understand the world. When the building moved. When I was very young, I saw a building move above me. Not necessarily the whole building, but rather its apex. The apex moved through a cloud-spattered sky. See, see, cried the other children, the building is moving. We had no fear of being crushed. The building floated, our senses floated. It seemed our feet too left the ground. The clouds were the colour of salt. The sky was as marbled as water. Everything seemed perfect. The building on its journey from right to left, or as we spun around and around, was that left to right? A building that knew how to be rooted in the earth and to hold starlings in its breast and how to seem alive. Many years later, I understood the illusion. The clouds were moving and not the building. Later still, I understood the illusion, that what you perceive as truth is all the better for being a lie. For aren't we happier in holding beliefs than in knowing how truth should be told? And if truth moves through the sky at an unexpected moment from left to right or right to left, would you experience discomfort or exhilaration at the difference? Working further backwards now, and we come to the biblical imagery that you'll find in Genesis 1, Genesis 1:1 actually, which here engenders another poem about birth. Light of my life, laid down you were in the deepest of sleeps, when water was on the face of the earth, and the earth carried the water in its womb. And he said, let there be light, and you were the tiny crack in my side, a little slipped stitch of a thing, like a seed in the expanse of sky, or else birthed on the face of the deep, not yet fit for dry land. The crack in my side, unformed and void, is where you divided darkness from darkness, light of the soul, light of my life. In British pubs, I don't know if it's still the case, but closing time used to be prefaced with, time, gentlemen, please. And here it's time to end this presentation with a final poem. It is time. This is to say that the earth will turn again, that the morning will be fleeced with iridescent light, and you will rise to greet it. That sound you hear is not anything you will have heard before. It is new and filled with awe and irreplaceable. Yes, the earth will turn again. The lilac will grow. The copper beech will expand. All that seeds itself will do so, but not in these fields. There will be other fields, yours and your neighbours. These waking hours complement the earth's turning towards the future, your sure-footedness as you rise to greet it. It is time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's unmute and clap for Gail, everyone. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for being my technical assistant, Melissa, and doing the
Big
screen
pleasure.
share.
I hope everyone could see the poems nicely as we went along.
Yes, we did. Thank you.
Good. Does anybody have a question or a comment? You're welcome to raise your hand on Zoom if you know how to do that. If you don't know how to do that, you can wave at the camera or just hop on. Or if you're shy, you're welcome to type a question in the chat as well. All right, Ed, you're up first.
Hey. Gail, thank you. That was a treat. I'm always struck by the crafting and the musicality of your writing, and this time again as well, the versatility of what you do. So if I have questions, also just to say that I love those allegorical some poems. They were among my favorites that you read tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I was just wondering about the, the the playing with perspective and the taking on a fictional I. And does that just tie into the idea of what you said about keep pushing with form and structure? Is it all of the same?
I think not really. It's that I know most poets tend to write about things in their lives and what's happening. I'm sort of the opposite. I'm very reluctant to sort of share my own life. So I have this sort of alter ego or another persona that sort of like drops in. But I mean, some of the poems, I mean, there'll be elements of autobiography. For instance, that poem that I read about the building moving. I mean, when I was in nursery school. And I remember looking up and I saw the apex of this building and I thought the building was moving, because obviously the clouds were being pushed around. And so, there might be some small aspect of a poem that is rooted in reality. And then I sort of go straight, into the fictional aspect. But I'm interested that you talked about the musicality, because for me, rhythm is so important in certainly my poetry. And, because I have a dance background, everything in a sense starts with movements. It's almost like a movement, within my soul that sort of starts, and it might come out as a dance or it might come out in poetry. But for me, it's very much, cadence is important. Not so much rhyme. I don't like rhyming poetry for the most part. Obviously there's some people who are really skilled. I don't tend to. But rhythm and cadence, and I go for half rhyme, actually. You see quite a lot of half rhyme in my work. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gail. I hope that next collection comes together.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I definitely picked up on the rhythm within your work as well. Do you, I'm curious to follow on to that question before I go to the next person. Do you read poems aloud to yourself when you're writing? Is the audio part of it a big part of your process?
Yeah, I don't read it out aloud, but it's going, certainly the rhythm, as I say, very often, it's like the rhythm that moves the poem on in terms of the meaning. So I used to make this joke. I'd say, I always know what the vowel sounds are, but it's the consonants that I have trouble with. Because I know if it's like, ooh, a, e, ah, I've got that in my head, that music is in my head. And then, as I say, I have to sort of like fit the consonants in to actually have words. Otherwise, you're going to have, rather strange poetry, alien poetry, So, yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, very.
Shark, you've got a hand.
Oh, Gail, that was just gorgeous. I loved that reading.
Thank you.
I in a way, Ed asked my question, so I had to think of another one. I wanted to also ask about how the poems are so. You said they have a dreamlike quality. I think that's right, but they feel very specific, and I'm interested in how they manage to be so specific when ostensibly they're not about you. Um, but that's what makes them so wonderful. But I'm very interested in the connection that you talked about between poetry and dance and movement. And I
Mm.
want to say something about how, I mean, when a poem starts um, to appear, to sort of to emerge, do
Mm.
you do you often does it often start as gesture then? Do you often feel like moving, and do you then sort of have to decide whether it's going to become a dance or a poem? Is it like that?
Not quite. I mean, it's sort of, the two are sort of separate in the sense that whatever feeling engenders, either a dance or a poem, it's like two branches of a river. So it's a
Yeah.
river that's sort of, so as I say, the source will be the same, and then immediately it sort of goes. Um, but I mean, interestingly, I mean, I don't do much. Well, I haven't done much choreography. So my dancing, it's interpretive dance, within a class sort of situation.
Mhm.
Um, but again, you make that dance your own.
Meeting information
And
center.
I think I had very good training, because when I performed many years ago, I was performing with somebody called Robin Orlin, who is, I mean, she's now an internationally known choreographer, but her work was, um, it was on the border of dance. It was more like performance art. And
Mm.
Robin, I mean, she literally, I remember when she gave me the instructions like for a piece that we were going to do. What the choreography was walk, walk forward, walk, walk backward, hit your head, fall down, which doesn't sound like, any great choreography. But, you had to take her directions and you had to make something of it. So I would create my own little story in my head, of she would never tell you what her choreography was about, by the way. She'd never discuss it. So you were left with question marks. So you had to make something yourself. And it
Submenu.
was very interesting because it was actually a similar way to making a poem. You had
Because
to create something almost out of nothing,
and you
uh,
have to you
out of
have
a
to
skeleton,
be
So,
you have to be surprised yourself at the end of it.
yeah, absolutely, And I mean that thing with the walk, walk, hit your head, walk, walk, fall down. I mean, the irony is that I must have done quite a good job because I was nominated for an AA Veto Award for Best Performer. And to this day, if you ask me what I was performing, I still don't know. But something came through. So, yeah. Anyway,
Oh,
thank you. Yeah.
it was lovely.
Mm.
Frank, over to you next.
Thank you. Thanks, Gail, for that reading. I really, really love all of that. And the standout for me was the poem called After. I really, really liked how that poem worked.
Thank
Super.
you.
My
Yeah.
question, Gail, is relates to the works that you put out. And I know you've published through Bototso your last one or two collections. And I would like to know how that works. Where did those last two works go to? Which audiences do they reach? Did they get reviews? Is there an audience there that you connect to? And I was really struck by your comment when you started by talking about that if you don't connect, there is this twilight state that you mentioned. So just getting some sense of that connection with an audience. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I've published through various different presses. So, in fact, my first press was Greville Press, which was, in fact, Harold Pinter's press. And, you know, so my earlier books are actually, I've got more books published in Britain than I have here. So it's quite interesting that I sort of have so many different foci, that, you know, I can appeal to, you know, British readers and also to South African readers. My last book that I have published, the most recent one, On Days Such as This, the audience that I had in my head was actually older people. It's sort of more mature audience and very much more a female audience. But generally, when I'm working on a poetry book, I don't necessarily decide while I'm writing it, you know, exactly what the audience will be. What happens is, as everybody knows, when you put a poetry book together, you've got a whole lot of poems sort of sitting, some mostly published, some might be unpublished. And then you start sort of trying to find some shape, you know, and for me, it's very important to shape one's collection. And then the shape, once you sort of know what shape you're going for, then you know what audience you're going for. So, you know, for me, it's a knock-on effect. But it'd be interesting to actually hear what other poets, you know, how they, you know, sort of work in that regard. But thank you, that's a very interesting question.
Thank you, Frank. All right, Ed, back to you.
Hey, Gail, just one last question. I'm just thinking of what's been said about the work remaining in a twilight state and different audiences and the risks that you're taking, the one poem taking a chance. So my question is, do you try these things out? So for example, what you read this evening, was there another audience that you tried the poems out, or do you trust the poems enough to just...
Yeah. Most of these I haven't read in any presentations that I've given, but a lot of these have been published, quite a few on the AVBOB site, and then some have been published in stanzas. That one about the book review, that was published overseas in Britain. And actually, interesting, that got a Reader's Choice Award, you know, so that was like a really different audience again, you know, so... yeah. So I've lost my thread now, what I was saying. You were saying, just repeat your question, sorry.
Sorry, I was just wondering
yes.
about whether you'd had sounding boards for that.
Yeah.
You did say at the beginning, AVBOB, I remember now.
Yeah. But I mean, I think, well, you're being my sounding board, you know, everybody here. Because as you know, when you publishing a poem and having it in print is one thing, but connecting with a live audience and having people hear your poems, that's a whole different ball game as well. You know, it's sort of the performance aspect for me is very important. You know, you've got to like try and make the poem come alive and connect, and you do connect in a different way. So it's always really exciting to see, you know, how people respond to your poem, you know, whether it's on the page or as a live, you know, or a Zoom thing.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I love the risk taking.
Thank you. Yeah.
Digby, I saw you were unmuting yourself. Do you have a question? Or
Digby?
anybody else?
All right. Digby is muted. I think he's trying to unmute. He's on an iPad.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. No, it's just saying thank you so much. I thought it was a marvelous reading, and I hope they will all be published. There was such variety of styles and influences, and the nursery school and the mythological. It was all fascinating. I'm always interested in what you're reading when you're writing. So are there any poets that you've rediscovered, discovered, that have shaped your more recent work, or do you return to old favorites? With the mythological and nursery rhyme echoes. One obviously thinks of Plath, of Anne Sexton, of even Gwendolyn Brooks. Gwendolyn Brooks, in fact, leapt into my mind with the sort of wry acceptance of age and the poignancy, but also celebration of it. What Gwendolyn Brooks speaks of as twinkles and twinges, which is a line I love, that come with old age, twinkles and twinges. So what have you been reading poetically recently, or
recently
or do you return to old favorites?
Sometimes I return to old favorites. The most recent that I've really got into in a big way is Sharon Olds. And particularly, she wrote the most marvelous book called Stag's Leap about the end of a 30-year marriage. And it was sort of an abandonment scenario. Well, it was an abandonment. And it is the most marvelous book because it reads like a novella. So I've read that probably about 3, 4, 5 times already. And I've started looking into some of her other work as well. There's her most recent book, I think, was called Ballads, Balladz. Some of it I like, some of it I don't. I don't like all of her work. But yeah, that's really interesting. And then I'm part of a poetry group we read on every second Saturday afternoon. And this is like an international group. We've got some people, I don't know, Mengwan, if you're there. I think they're in Prague at the moment. And we've got people in Britain and America and, of course, here. So, and then we read poems to each other. And that's a marvelous way of discovering poems. Because, I mean, I must say, look, at school, we virtually never did any American poetry. It was all sort of very British, which was great. I mean, I loved it. But, we just weren't sort of like introduced to the great American poets. I mean, okay, I got into Plath when I was at university, as everybody did.
Indeed.
But, so that's sort of been the most recent. But if you ask what I'm currently reading now, I'm not even reading poetry. I go back every 5 years and I reread all of Jane Austen. So that's what I'm busy doing.
That's a perfect answer.
Yeah.
In fact, if you can all still hear me, I must tell a little anecdote here that Eyre, the great British philosopher, when asked once, I think in the 60s or 70s, if he ever read any novels, he said, yes, I read all 7 of them once a year. And he was referring, of course, to, for him, the complete novels were Jane Austen and nobody else. So it seems to me a wonderful, all 7 of them once a year. So it seems a perfect answer. Thanks, my dear. It was really wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Digby, for that. All right. Do we have anyone with a final question before we wrap up this part of the session? Final takers. We've got lots of thanks in the chat already, saying thank you for the poems. All right. Looks like nobody else is wanting to stick up their hand. So thank you, Gail, so much for sharing all of these poems. That was really a treat to hear them. I think your reading was wonderful. The rhythm, it was a hypnotic way to spend an hour. So thank you so much for sharing. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's not over, but we are going to take a short break.